Story number 1. Ghost Ride on Clinton Road. The rain pounded relentlessly against my windshield as I navigated the winding path of Clinton Road. Nestled deep within the dense forests of New Jersey, Clinton Road was infamous for its eerie legends and supernatural occurrences. The locals spoke of strange lights, ghostly apparitions, and unexplained phenomena that turned the otherwise serene route into a hotspot for thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts. As a long-haul truck driver, I'd heard countless stories during my nights on the road, but tonight felt different. The darkness seemed thicker, the silence more oppressive, as if the very forest was holding its breath. I'm Tom Richards, a seasoned driver with a pragmatic view of the world. My companions on this particular journey were 4 friends I'd met during a rare night stop at a roadside diner: Emily, a passionate history buff with an insatiable curiosity for the past; Jack, a dedicated paranormal investigator who thrived on uncovering the unknown; Sarah, a talented photographer always chasing the perfect shot; and Ryan, our group's steadfast skeptic, who never missed an opportunity to debunk our theories. We had all agreed to join a late-night tour of Clinton Road, eager to experience firsthand the spine-chilling tales that had become the stuff of local legend. As I steered my truck through the narrow lanes, the headlights barely penetrated the thick canopy of trees, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The road was deserted, save for the occasional flicker of distant lights and the rhythmic patter of rain on metal. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew heavier. The oppressive silence was only broken by the occasional creak of the truck's suspension and the distant hoot of an owl. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a lone figure standing by the roadside. The man was drenched, his clothes soaked through, and he stood motionless, gazing down the road with hollow eyes. "Should we stop?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. I hesitated, the stories Jack had shared echoing in my mind. "Probably nothing, just someone caught in the storm," I replied, though a chill ran down my spine. But Emily was already reaching for her flashlight. "We can't just leave him out here. He might need help." Reluctantly, I pulled over, and the rain seemed to intensify as the truck came to a halt. The man approached, his movements slow and deliberate. He climbed into the truck, shivering violently, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thank you for stopping," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I need to get home." Despite Ryan's skepticism, we decided to help. I shut the truck door and handed him a blanket, trying to offer some comfort. As we drove away, a strange sense of unease settled over me. The man remained silent, staring out the window with an intensity that felt almost unnatural. The road twisted and turned, the trees closing in around us like a protective barrier. As we continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The temperature inside the truck dropped, and my breath became visible in the frigid air, despite the storm outside. The man's presence was unnerving, his eyes seemed to hold a depth of sorrow and anger that was hard to comprehend. Jack, ever the investigator, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe he's part of the legend," he mused. "Clinton Road is known for its ghostly encounters." I glanced at Ryan, who was busy trying to engage the man in conversation. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "To Clinton Cemetery," the man replied, his voice strained. "I need to see her one last time." The cemetery was a long way off, but we complied, driven by a mix of compassion and the thrill of the unknown. As we approached, the storm seemed to abate, the rain tapering off into a light drizzle. The cemetery gates loomed ahead, their ironwork intricate and foreboding. We pulled into the cemetery's entrance, the atmosphere shifting dramatically. The sky was still overcast, but the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with mist. The man exited the truck, pausing to turn and look back at us. "Thank you," he said softly before walking towards the headstones with a purposeful stride. I felt a sudden urge to follow him, a compulsion that overrode my usual caution. "Wait," I called out, but he was already out of sight, swallowed by the fog that clung to the ground. Jack exchanged a worried glance with the rest of us. "I think we should leave him," he said, his voice tight with concern. But before we could react, the man reappeared at the entrance, his eyes now glowing with an eerie light. "You shouldn't have come here," he warned, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Now, you can't leave." The truck seemed to grow cold, the engine struggling to respond as if fighting against an invisible force. The lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced around us. The man's form began to waver, becoming more translucent with each passing second. Ryan, trying to maintain his skepticism, backed away from the window. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but his voice betrayed his fear. Suddenly, the truck lurched forward, accelerating uncontrollably down the road. I fought to regain control, but the steering wheel felt heavy, unresponsive to my commands. The trees blurred past us, the road twisting and turning in impossible ways, as if the very fabric of reality was being distorted. Desperation clawed at me as we hurtled through the night, the man's warnings echoing in my mind. "You shouldn't have come here. Now, you can't leave." The road seemed endless, stretching out into the darkness with no hope of escape. The mist thickened, enveloping the truck in a suffocating embrace. The temperature inside dropped further, my breath coming out in short, icy bursts. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the truck began to slow. The rain picked up again, the droplets pelting the windshield with renewed fury. I finally managed to regain control, steering us off the twisted path and back onto the main road. "We're not going to make it," Jack said, his voice strained. "We need to find a way out of here." But the road seemed to loop back on itself, the landscape shifting in an endless cycle. No matter which direction we turned, we found ourselves back on Clinton Road, the mist obscuring our vision and the storm raging around us. Days turned into weeks, and we couldn't shake the memories of that night on Clinton Road. Emily, deeply affected by the experience, began researching the legends surrounding the area, uncovering tales of lost souls and vengeful spirits bound to the road by tragic circumstances. Sarah's photographs, taken during the encounter, were hauntingly beautiful yet disturbingly unsettling. Each image captured something just out of focus, a shadow, a fleeting expression, a hint of something unseen. Ryan, though initially dismissive, found himself plagued by nightmares, reliving the terror of the night and hearing the man's anguished cries in his sleep. One evening, almost a month after the incident, I received a call from a local historian who had heard our story. He invited us to a private meeting to discuss the deeper mysteries of Clinton Road. Intrigued and seeking answers, we agreed to meet him at a secluded cabin near the edge of the forest. During the meeting, the historian revealed ancient texts and old newspaper clippings that spoke of Lavinia Fisher, a notorious serial killer who had cursed Clinton Road before her execution. She vowed that any guilty soul passing through her territory would be forever haunted by her presence, he explained. Her curse is powerful, and it binds the spirits of the wrongdoers to this road, ensuring they never find peace. Realizing the gravity of our situation, we knew we had to find a way to break the curse. With the historian's guidance, we delved into the dark history of Clinton Road, seeking rituals and ancient rites that could appease Lavinia's restless spirit. Determined to end the nightmare, we returned to Clinton Road armed with knowledge and protective talismans. The air was thick with anticipation as we approached the spot where I had first encountered the man. The storm had cleared, leaving the road illuminated by the silvery light of a full moon. We began the ritual, chanting the ancient words we had uncovered, our voices steady despite the fears that gripped us. The air grew colder, the mist swirling around us as if responding to our incantation. Suddenly, the shadowy figure appeared once more, his eyes filled with sorrow and anger. "We must help her find peace," Jack said, stepping forward with unwavering determination. "Lavinia, we release you from your curse." The ground trembled as Lavinia's spirit let out a piercing scream, the sound echoing through the night. The mist parted, revealing the spectral form of Lavinia Fisher, her eyes now soft and mournful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fading into the night. "Peace at last." As the last words left our lips, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene calm. The road seemed to straighten, the mist dissipating as dawn broke over Clinton Road. We watched in awe as the first light of morning bathed the forest, the curse finally broken. We drove away from Clinton Road, the nightmare behind us, but the memories etched into our souls. The legend of the ghostly ride had been fulfilled, and Lavinia Fisher had found her peace. But as I drove away, the weight of what we'd experienced settled over me like a heavy fog. The road stretched out before us, now serene and unthreatening, a stark contrast to the terror we had endured. The trees on either side swayed gently in the morning breeze, their branches whispering secrets only they could understand. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky and a sense of closure that I desperately needed. "We did it," Jack said, his voice barely masking his exhaustion. "We actually helped her." Emily nodded, her face pale but resolute. "It's over, for now. But we need to stay vigilant. There are other roads like Clinton, other curses that need breaking." Sarah looked at her camera, a small smile playing on her lips despite the lingering fear. "These photos will tell our story. Maybe it will help others who find themselves trapped in similar situations." Ryan, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "I used to think none of this was real. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. But I'm glad we were able to help." As we continued down the road, the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the forest. The oppressive darkness had been lifted, replaced by a peaceful dawn. The memories of that night would forever haunt us, but there was a sense of accomplishment and relief in knowing we had made a difference. Aftermath. Months passed, and life gradually returned to normal. Emily continued her research into paranormal phenomena, driven by the desire to uncover more about the curses that plagued roads like Clinton. Jack became more dedicated to his investigations, now with a deeper understanding of the spiritual battles that took place behind the veil of the living world. Sarah's photographs gained recognition for their eerie beauty, each image telling a story that words couldn't capture. The picture of Lavinia Fisher, now framed in her living room, served as a constant reminder of the night we faced our fears and overcame them. Ryan, once a skeptic, found himself increasingly open to the supernatural. He joined us on future expeditions, bringing his analytical mind to help balance our group's dynamic. Together, we formed a bond forged in fear and triumph, united by the experiences that had changed us forever. One evening, almost a year after our encounter, we received an invitation from the historian who had helped us break the curse. He requested a reunion to celebrate our success and discuss other haunted sites that needed our attention. Excited and eager for new adventures, we agreed to join him, knowing that our journey was far from over. As we stood together once more, ready to face whatever darkness awaited, I couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. Clinton Road had been our proving ground, and now we were prepared to take on the shadows that lurked in the forgotten corners of America's most haunted roads. But deep down, I knew that some places held secrets that were best left undisturbed, and that the thin veil between the living and the dead was something we must always respect. The legends of Clinton Road had been laid to rest, but the memories and lessons learned would guide us in our future endeavors, ensuring that we approached each new mystery with both courage and caution. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the land, we prepared to embark on our next journey, forever changed by the ghostly ride on Clinton Road and the spirits we had helped find peace. Epilogue. Years later, the story of our night on Clinton Road became a local legend, shared among truckers, hikers, and thrill-seekers who dared to traverse the infamous path. The tale of the ghostly man seeking a ride and the curse of Lavinia Fisher served as both a warning and a testament to the power of determination and friendship in the face of the unknown. Sometimes, when I drive down a lonely road at night, I can still feel the presence of that night, a reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. The whispers of the past echo in my mind, urging me to continue our mission of uncovering the hidden stories that lie in the shadows, ensuring that no spirit remains lost or forgotten. Clinton Road was just the beginning, a chapter in a story that spanned beyond the boundaries of the living world, weaving together the threads of history, fear, and the eternal quest for peace. And as long as there were roads like Clinton, our journey would continue, driven by the ghosts that walked alongside us, forever intertwined in the eerie dance between the living and the dead. Story number 2. Ghostly Ride on I-70. The night was unforgivingly dark as I drove my truck along Interstate 70, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt stretching through the heart of Kansas. The highway, notorious for its desolate stretches and eerie legends, was especially menacing tonight. Fog clung to the road like a shroud, and the rain hammered against my windshield with relentless fury, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. The lights from my truck's headlights cast long, wavering shadows that danced menacingly among the towering pines lining the highway. I'm Jake Thompson, a long-haul trucker with more miles on my rig than I care to admit. My job often takes me through lonely roads and forgotten stretches of highway, but tonight felt different. There was an oppressive feeling in the air, a sense of foreboding that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. I had heard the stories about I-70, the tales of phantom hitchhikers, of drivers disappearing without a trace, and of a malevolent presence that roamed the highway seeking vengeance. As the miles dragged on, the rhythmic pounding of the rain and the hum of the engine became a monotonous lullaby, lulling me into a state of weary resignation. The radio played a soft country tune, barely audible over the storm, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that tonight's journey would be unlike any other. It was around 2 a.m. when I first saw him, a lone figure standing by the roadside, drenched from the relentless rain. His posture was slumped, his clothes soaked through, and his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. I slowed my truck, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the torrential downpour. As I approached, the man raised a hand in a silent plea, his eyes meeting mine through the misty glass. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. "Need a ride?" I called out, my voice steady despite the unease that settled in my gut. He nodded slowly, a silent gratitude in his gesture. "Thank you," he whispered, stepping into the truck with a grace that seemed almost unnatural in the storm. I rolled down the window, the cold night air whipping in as he climbed into the back seat. He didn't speak, his presence heavy and foreboding. I secured his seatbelt, feeling the chill of his damp clothes seep into the warm interior of the truck. As I resumed driving, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The man sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside, yet there was an intensity in his gaze that made me uncomfortable. He didn't move, didn't breathe audibly, just sat there like a statue carved from fear itself. The highway seemed to twist and turn unnaturally as we continued our journey, the landscape becoming more desolate and the shadows deeper. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the storm clouds churned above us like angry spirits. I tried to make conversation, desperate to dispel the tension that hung in the air. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. "I need to get home," he replied, his voice low and raspy, carrying a weight that felt ancient and cursed. I nodded, though his destination wasn't listed on my delivery route. "Home is a long way from here." "Where exactly?" He glanced back out the window, the outline of the highway blurring in the rain-soaked darkness. "Just a bit further." "Can you go any further?" Before I could respond, the temperature inside the truck seemed to drop dramatically. My breath became visible in the frigid air, and the warmth I had relied on for comfort now felt like a distant memory. The man remained silent, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the truck, startling me. I glanced in the mirror again, but the man was still as motionless as before. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice betraying my anxiety. He remained silent, but I could feel his presence intensifying, a palpable force pressing down on me. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the highway disappearing into a tunnel of darkness that swallowed our truck whole. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, to abandon this cursed ride. As we drove deeper into the night, the highway took on an otherworldly quality. The road seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways, the scenery outside the windows shifting and warping like a nightmare come to life. The man in the back seat remained still, his eyes never leaving the road, yet his presence felt increasingly malevolent. Out of nowhere, the truck lurched violently to the side, tires skidding on the slick asphalt. I fought to regain control, but the steering wheel felt heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible force. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the torrential rain, barely cutting through the deluge. "What's happening?" I shouted, desperation lacing my voice. The man turned his head slowly, his eyes now glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. "You shouldn't have stopped," he whispered, his voice echoing through the confined space of the truck. "Now, you can't leave." Panic surged through me as the truck veered off the highway, plunging into a dense thicket of trees that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The truck's engine strained, the vehicle bucking and twisting as if possessed by a malevolent spirit. The man reached out from the back seat, his hand passing through me like smoke, leaving behind a chill that penetrated my very soul. "Let me go," I pleaded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Please, I don't want any trouble." He laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that reverberated through the truck. "There is no escape. You are mine now." In a final act of desperation, I slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a screeching halt. The vehicle shuddered violently, the sound of breaking glass and twisting metal filling the air. The man in the back seat began to fade, his form becoming translucent as he stared at me with eyes that held centuries of sorrow and rage. "Home," he whispered, his voice a haunting melody that seemed to linger long after he had disappeared. The storm outside began to subside, the rain tapering off into a light drizzle as the truck settled into an unnerving silence. Heart pounding and adrenaline coursing through my veins, I stared out the windshield, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. The highway was once again open, the road stretching out before me in a serene, almost peaceful manner. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by the gentle glow of dawn breaking over the horizon. I glanced back at the empty seat, the back of the seat now just an ordinary, lifeless space. What just happened? I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the lingering fears that clung to me like a second skin. As I resumed my journey, the eerie calm of the highway seemed almost mocking. The stories of Clinton Road had always been dismissed as mere folklore, but tonight I had experienced the chilling reality firsthand. The ghostly hitchhiker, the curse, the malevolent presence, it was all too real, and it had left an indelible mark on my soul. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night haunted me relentlessly. Every time I drove along Interstate 70, especially during storms, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the spectral figure standing by the roadside, waiting for another unsuspecting victim. A month after the terrifying encounter, the psychological scars of that night began to manifest in subtle yet disturbing ways. I started noticing unexplained scratches on my truck's interior, marks that seemed to appear overnight despite my meticulous cleaning. The mirror sometimes showed fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye, and a persistent feeling of being watched plagued me during my long hauls. One evening, as I drove through a particularly desolate stretch of I-70, I felt an intense presence in the truck. My heart raced as I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the ghostly hitchhiker staring back at me. But there was nothing, only the empty darkness reflecting my own terrified expression. Sleep eluded me, replaced by vivid nightmares where I was trapped on the cursed highway, driving endlessly without escape, pursued by the ghostly figure of the man I had picked up. His hollow eyes and sinister smile were etched into my mind, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. One night, after another restless dream, I received a call from a local police officer. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about the incident on I-70 last month," he said, his voice grave. We met at the station, and the officer revealed that Jake's account matched several unsolved cases of disappearances along the same stretch of highway. "There have been reports of a ghostly hitchhiker causing accidents and strange phenomena," he explained. "Some believe it's the spirit of a man seeking revenge, others think it's trapped by an unfulfilled promise." Determined to find answers, I began researching the dark history of Clinton Road and the legends that had long been whispered among truckers and locals. The more I delved, the more I realized that my encounter was part of a larger, more sinister pattern, one that seemed to be a cycle of vengeance and tragedy perpetuated by a malevolent spirit. Driven by a need to break the cycle, I sought out the help of a paranormal investigator named Dr. Laura Bennett, known for her expertise in supernatural phenomena. Together, we delved into the origins of the curse that plagued Interstate 70, uncovering tales of betrayal, loss, and unfulfilled vengeance that had festered over decades. Our investigation led us to an old, abandoned rest stop along Clinton Road, where the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. According to local lore, the spirit haunting I-70 was not just a random victim but a wronged soul seeking retribution for a past injustice, a man named Victor Kane, betrayed and left to die by those he trusted. Armed with this knowledge, we devised a plan to appease Victor's restless spirit. We returned to the spot where I had picked him up, the rain-soaked highway illuminated by the pale light of dawn. Dr. Bennett led a ritual designed to help Victor find peace, acknowledging his pain and offering closure for his tortured soul. As we chanted the ancient words, the air grew thick with energy. The oppressive darkness seemed to coalesce into a tangible form, and there he stood, Victor Kane, his eyes now filled with a sorrowful resignation rather than rage. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice now gentle and at peace. "I can finally rest." With a final, lingering glance, Victor's spirit dissipated into the morning light, the curse that had haunted I-70 for so long finally broken. The highway felt different, less foreboding, more serene, as if the land itself had been freed from a dark shroud. Life gradually returned to normal, but the memories of that night remained etched in my mind. I continued my journeys along Interstate 70, but now with a sense of peace and the knowledge that I had helped end a cycle of suffering. The legends of Clinton Road still lingered, but the nightmares that had haunted me for so long had finally come to an end. Sometimes, when I drive through the lonely stretches of I-70, I catch a glimpse of a lone figure by the roadside. But instead of fear, I feel a sense of compassion, knowing that some spirits are better left in peace. The stories of Old Charleston Jail and the Cursed Highway would forever be a reminder of the thin line between our world and the supernatural, and the power of understanding and compassion in the face of darkness. Story number 3. Ghostly Ride on Texas Highway I-70. The night air was thick with humidity as I drove my truck along Interstate 70, the main artery stretching endlessly through the heart of Texas. The highway, renowned for its vast expanses of flat plains and the occasional silhouette of a lone windmill, was particularly desolate tonight. The only light came from the pale glow of my truck's headlights and the intermittent flash of passing cars in the distance. The moon hung low, casting an eerie luminescence over the endless sea of grass and dirt that surrounded the road. I'm Mark Thompson, a long-haul trucker who spent countless nights navigating the highways of America. Over the years, I've heard numerous stories about the supernatural happenings on I-70, especially the tales of the woman in white who haunts this stretch of road. Most dismiss them as mere folklore, exaggerated by lonely nights and the mind's propensity for fear. I never believed in ghosts, but something about tonight felt different. As I drove through the empty landscape, my thoughts were consumed by the monotony of the road and the endless miles ahead. The radio played a soft country tune, a comforting distraction from the oppressive silence that enveloped the highway. Little did I know, this night would etch itself into my memory forever. It was just past midnight when I first saw her, a figure standing by the roadside, drenched from the relentless rain that had started earlier. My headlights illuminated her long, flowing white dress, stark against the dark backdrop of the storm-soaked highway. She stood motionless, her hands outstretched as if pleading for a ride. The rain pelted the windshield, making visibility difficult, but there she was, a ghostly apparition under the harsh glare of my headlights. I hesitated, the stories I'd heard flickering through my mind. Probably just someone caught in the storm, I muttered to myself, yet a lingering unease settled in my gut. Despite my reservations, compassion won out. Need a ride? I called out, my voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. She nodded silently, her eyes vacant yet sorrowful. I pulled over, the truck's brakes screeching against the slick asphalt. The rain seemed to intensify as she approached, her steps slow and deliberate. I opened the passenger door, and she climbed into the back seat without a word, her presence cold and unsettling. As I drove away, I couldn't help but glance at her through the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with dark, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through me. She didn't speak, just stared out the window, the storm raging around us. The air in the truck felt thick, charged with an inexplicable tension that made it hard to breathe. The further we drove, the more unnatural the journey felt. The temperature inside the truck dropped noticeably, my breath becoming visible despite the heater running. The woman remained silent, her gaze fixed on the darkened landscape outside. I tried to break the silence, asking her where she needed to go, but she only shook her head slightly, eyes never leaving the road. As the miles passed, I began to notice other unsettling signs. The rearview mirror reflected not just her image, but shadows flitting at the edge of my vision, fleeting and intangible. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as a sense of dread settled over me. The rain outside seemed to echo the turmoil within the truck, a relentless reminder of the darkness we were navigating. Suddenly, her presence became more oppressive. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, her silent gaze heavy with unspoken anguish. The road ahead twisted unnaturally, as if leading us deeper into a nightmare rather than the familiar expanse of Texas plains. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but the truck refused to respond, the engine sputtering as if resisting my commands. "Something's wrong," I whispered, more to myself than to her, feeling the weight of the supernatural pressing down on us. The woman in white remained motionless, a spectral sentinel in the storm, as we continued our eerie voyage down the haunted highway. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a bend in the road where the storm seemed to abate, the rain tapering off into a light drizzle. The highway stretched out before us, now illuminated by the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. Relief washed over me, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the morning sun began to chase away the shadows of the night. I glanced back at her, half expecting to see her still seated in the back. But she was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only the lingering chill in the air and the faint scent of lavender. My heart pounded in my chest, the intensity of the encounter leaving me shaken to my core. I sat in silence, processing the surreal experience, unsure of what had transpired or what it all meant. As I resumed my journey, the truck's engine roared to life smoothly, and the road ahead seemed normal once more. Yet, a lingering sense of unease remained, a reminder that some encounters transcend the boundaries of reality and the unknown. The woman in white, with her silent plea and haunting gaze, had left an indelible mark on my soul, a chilling memory that would forever haunt my nights on the road. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night on I-70 refused to fade. Every time I drove along that desolate stretch of highway, especially during storms, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the ghostly figure of the woman in white standing by the roadside. The fear of encountering her again gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Determined to find answers, I delved into the history of I-70 and the legends that surrounded it. I discovered that the highway was the site of numerous unsolved disappearances and tragic accidents over the decades, many of which involved mysterious hitchhikers who vanished without a trace. The most infamous of these stories was that of Laura Jenkins, a young woman who had been tragically killed in a car accident on I-70 in the late 1970s. Her spirit was said to linger, seeking a way to move on from the tragic fate that had befallen her. Intrigued and driven by a need to understand, I sought out local historians and spoke with those who had encountered similar apparitions. Their stories mirrored my own experience, accounts of ghostly women in white who appeared during storms, their presence foretelling doom or longing for connection. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Laura Jenkins, or a spirit like hers, was still bound to the highway, trapped in an eternal cycle of anguish and despair. The psychological toll of my encounter with the woman in white began to manifest in unsettling ways. I started experiencing vivid nightmares, reliving the stormy night and her sorrowful gaze. The boundaries between sleep and reality blurred, leaving me restless and haunted by the spectral figure that had forever changed my perception of the road. One night, as I drove through a particularly violent storm, the memory of that encounter resurfaced with a vengeance. The rain lashed against the windshield, and lightning illuminated the darkened highway in brief, terrifying flashes. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her again, standing by the roadside, drenched and forlorn. My heart raced as I felt the familiar chill descend upon me. This time, however, she approached the truck with a purpose. "Help me," she whispered, her voice carrying a haunting sorrow that resonated deep within me. "I can't move on." Overwhelmed by empathy and a desire to free her from her eternal torment, I decided to assist her. I pulled over once more, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. She climbed into the truck, her presence now imbued with a sense of urgency rather than mere longing. As I drove, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a gentle warmth replacing the coldness that had once gripped the vehicle. Her gaze softened, and she began to share fragments of her tragic story, revealing the pain and loss that had bound her spirit to the highway. With each word, I felt a connection form between us, a bridge spanning the divide between the living and the dead. Together, we navigated the stormy night, the rain now a soothing backdrop to her heartfelt confession. As dawn approached, a sense of peace settled over the truck, and the oppressive darkness that had once consumed us lifted. She smiled softly, her spirit finally finding solace in the understanding and compassion I had offered. With a final, grateful nod, she faded away, leaving behind a serene stillness that replaced the chaos of the storm. The highway, once a symbol of desolation and fear, now felt like a pathway to closure and redemption. I drove away with a newfound sense of purpose, knowing that I had played a part in freeing a tormented soul from her eternal suffering. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, yet the experience on I-70 remained a profound and lasting memory. The encounters with the woman in white had forever altered my perception of the world, blurring the lines between reality and the supernatural. I became more attuned to the stories of those who had passed on, driven by a desire to help other lost souls find peace. One evening, as I drove along a familiar stretch of highway, I felt a familiar presence beside me. Turning to glance in the rearview mirror, I saw her once more, the woman in white. But this time, her expression was one of peace and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm that resonated deep within me. With a gentle smile, she faded into the morning light, leaving me with a sense of fulfillment and a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the spirits that linger just beyond our perception. The legends of I-70 had been more than mere tales. They were echoes of the past, lingering whispers of souls seeking connection and closure. As I continued my journey, the haunting beauty of the highway took on a new meaning. The endless miles stretched before me, each one a testament to the stories that weave through the fabric of time and space. And though the road remains desolate and eerie, it now holds a sense of hope, a beacon for those seeking peace in the shadows of the night. Sometimes, when I glance in the mirror, I can still see a fleeting shadow or catch a whisper of her voice, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest nights, compassion and understanding can bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The woman in white on Texas Highway I-70 is no longer a harbinger of doom, but a symbol of redemption and the enduring power of human connection. Story number 4. The Last Passenger on Golden Gate. Death Valley, though not the setting of our story, shared the same desolate, unforgiving beauty that characterized the Golden Gate Bridge during the dead of night. The Golden Gate Bridge, an iconic symbol of San Francisco, stretched majestically over the cold, dark waters of the Pacific. But beneath its grandeur lay a sinister reputation, one that few dared to acknowledge. It was said to be one of the most haunted locations in the world, a place where the restless souls of those who had taken their own lives lingered, forever trapped in a liminal space between life and death. In the early 1980s, the stories about the woman in white, an apparition of a tragic soul who appeared to drivers late at night, began to circulate more widely. Many dismissed them as urban legends, fueled by the eerie silence of the bridge and the isolation of driving across it at night. But for those who experienced it, the truth was far more terrifying. I'm Laura Mitchell, a 29-year-old Uber driver working the late-night shifts in San Francisco. My job often required me to traverse the Golden Gate Bridge alone, shuttling passengers from one side of the city to the other. I had heard the stories about the woman in white, but like most people, I brushed them off as superstition. That was until a fateful night in the summer of 1982 changed everything. It was a particularly foggy night, the kind that made visibility almost non-existent. The rain had been relentless, turning the bridge into a shimmering ribbon of light and darkness. My truck's windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour, the sound of rain pelting the glass creating a monotonous rhythm that lulled me into a weary state. I had just dropped off a passenger near the Marina District and was making my way back across the bridge to pick up my next fare. As I drove, the fog thickened, swallowing the bridge in a blanket of white. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. It was around 2 a.m. when I first saw her, a figure standing at the edge of the bridge, barely discernible through the mist. Her white dress billowed in the wind, and her long hair cascaded over her shoulders, partially obscuring her face. She stood motionless, gazing out over the dark waters below. I slowed my truck, the headlights casting a ghostly glow on her form. My heart skipped a beat as I realized she was still there, her presence both haunting and sorrowful. "Need a ride?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly despite my attempts to remain calm. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step toward the road, her feet sinking slightly into the wet asphalt. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded slowly and began to walk towards the truck. I parked on the side, the engine idling as I reached for the door handle. Her movements were deliberate, almost ethereal, as she approached the vehicle. She climbed into the back seat without a word, her presence sending a chill through the cabin despite the heater running at full blast. I turned around, my eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and filled with an indescribable sadness. She didn't speak, merely stared out the window as if searching for something, or someone, beyond the veil of the living. As we continued driving, an unnerving silence settled over the truck. The woman remained still, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse outside. I tried to break the silence, hoping to ease the tension. So, where are you headed? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting mine again. I just want to get home, she murmured, her voice faint and echoing, like a distant memory. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the atmosphere inside the truck growing colder despite the heater. My breath became visible in the frigid air, and I glanced back at her through the mirror. Her expression remained vacant, yet there was an intensity in her eyes that made me uneasy. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the landmarks blending into a featureless expanse of fog and darkness. The woman in white continued to sit in the back, her presence oppressive and unyielding. Every few minutes, she would glance out the window, her eyes following something or someone in the distance. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the truck, causing me to jolt forward. I turned around to see her sitting still, but her appearance had changed slightly. The once vibrant white dress now looked tattered, as if she had been walking through thorny bushes or dense underbrush. Her hair was disheveled, and a single tear streaked down her pale cheek. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached out a hand toward me, her fingers trembling. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Before I could react, the truck was engulfed in a sudden, icy coldness. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of her tears, reflecting off the windshield like tiny, sad stars. Panic set in as I fumbled for the emergency lights, but the storm outside had knocked out the electrical systems. With the truck now a silent, frozen vessel in the storm, I felt a desperate urge to escape the suffocating presence of the woman in white. The wind howled outside, and the rain battered the truck with renewed fury. I grabbed the emergency light switch, flicking it on, but it only cast a weak, intermittent glow that did little to illuminate the interior. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. Her eyes met mine once more, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of pain and anger. "You have to help me," she pleaded, her voice echoing around the confined space. Before I could respond, the truck lurched violently, the wheels skidding on the slick asphalt. I struggled to regain control, but the steering felt heavy, as if an invisible force was pressing down on me. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows, warping the landscape into a nightmarish tableau. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing, her figure becoming more defined as the truck skidded to a stop. She began to rise from the back seat, her movements fluid and unnatural. "You need to let me go," she hissed, her voice now laced with a malevolent edge. I reached for the door handle, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. The woman advanced toward me, her face contorted with anguish and rage. "If you don't help me, you'll never leave this place," she warned, her eyes burning with an unholy fire. Suddenly, the truck's interior was bathed in a blinding light. The storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by an otherworldly glow that enveloped the vehicle. I felt a pull, a force dragging me towards the back seat where the woman stood. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the invisible grip, trying to free myself. With a final, desperate effort, I broke free and slammed the door open, stumbling out into the storm. The rain pelted my face, and the cold seared through my skin as I ran down the roadside, the bridge looming ahead like a beacon of hope and terror. Behind me, I heard her laughter, a haunting, echoing sound that reverberated through the night. After that harrowing night, I sought out the local authorities and shared my story. The police were skeptical at first, dismissing it as a product of stress and the storm. But as I recounted the details, they grew concerned. Officer Daniels, a seasoned cop with a deep understanding of local legends, listened intently. "You're not the first to encounter her," he said thoughtfully. "There have been numerous reports of a woman in white on the Golden Gate Bridge. They say she's the spirit of Laura Jenkins, a young woman who tragically lost her life in a car accident on the bridge in the late 1970s. Her death was ruled a suicide, but some believe it was more complicated, perhaps foul play or a series of tragic events that led to her demise." He continued, "Many believe her spirit is trapped, endlessly searching for a way to find peace or escape her torment. She often appears to drivers at night, seeking help or hoping to prevent others from meeting the same fate." I nodded, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. The woman in white wasn't just a random apparition, she was a restless soul, bound to the bridge by a tragic and unresolved past. In the weeks that followed, the encounter left me deeply shaken. The nightmares were relentless, visions of Laura standing on the bridge, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow, her voice a haunting whisper in the dead of night. I began to notice strange occurrences around me. Objects in my truck would move on their own, and I could feel a persistent presence watching me, especially when driving near the Golden Gate Bridge. One evening, while recounting my experience to a friend, I mentioned the woman in white. "I can't stop thinking about her," I confessed. "It's like she's still here, lingering around, waiting for something." My friend, Mike, shrugged. "Maybe you should find a way to help her move on. If she's trapped here, maybe there's something you can do to set her free." Determined to find closure, I delved into the history of Laura Jenkins, seeking any clues that might explain her lingering presence. I discovered that Laura had been engaged to a local man, Tom Williams, who had been deeply affected by her death. Rumors swirled that Tom never recovered from her loss, leading to his own descent into despair. Some even speculated that Tom had been involved in Laura's death, though nothing was ever proven. The more I learned, the more I felt a connection to Laura's plight. Her story mirrored the sorrow and longing I had felt during our encounter. It became clear that helping her find peace was the only way to break the cycle of torment that had ensnared both her and me. Armed with knowledge and a newfound purpose, I returned to the Golden Gate Bridge one last time. The night was clear, the stars twinkling above like distant beacons. I parked my truck at the edge of the bridge, the same spot where I had first encountered Laura. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of the waves crashing below providing a haunting soundtrack to my mission. I began to speak, recounting Laura's story aloud, hoping that acknowledging her pain would offer her the peace she so desperately sought. "Laura Jenkins," I called out softly, "I know you're here. I know you're looking for a way to move on. Your story doesn't have to end in sorrow. Let me help you find peace." As I spoke, the air around me seemed to shimmer, the boundary between the living and the dead growing thin. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the faint outline of a woman in white began to materialize before me. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of hope within their depths. "I can't leave," she whispered, her voice tinged with desperation. "You can," I replied firmly. "You deserve peace, Laura. Let go of your pain and find your way home." A tear slid down her cheek as she reached out a hand towards me. "Thank you," she whispered, her form beginning to dissolve into the night air. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene calm that washed over me. As the last remnants of her spirit faded away, I felt a profound sense of relief. The bridge, once a place of despair and tragedy, now felt peaceful, as if the weight of her sorrow had been lifted. I turned to leave, knowing that our encounter had finally brought closure to both of us. Months have passed since that night, and the haunting memories have slowly faded, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and peace. I continue to drive the Golden Gate Bridge, but now with a sense of connection to the past and a deeper understanding of the fragile boundary between life and death. The legend of the woman in white persists, but for those who believe, it serves as a reminder that compassion and understanding can transcend the boundaries of the physical world, offering solace to restless souls seeking their final rest. And as I gaze out over the bridge at night, I sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of her silhouette, a silent guardian watching over the bridge, ensuring that her story, and those of others like her, are never forgotten. Story number 5. The Last Companion in Death Valley. Death Valley. The very name conjures images of desolation, extreme heat, and an unforgiving landscape that tests the limits of human endurance. Nestled between the Sierra Nevada and the Panamint Range in eastern California, Death Valley is one of the harshest environments on Earth. Its vast expanse of barren sand dunes, rocky canyons, and scorching temperatures create an atmosphere of isolation and despair, especially under the cloak of night. The valley's extreme conditions have made it a notorious location for tragic accidents and mysterious disappearances, feeding into the dark legends that shroud this remote region. It was the late 1980s, a time when Death Valley was already steeped in tales of the supernatural. Among these stories was the legend of the Last Companion, a ghostly figure of a man who roamed the highways and byways of the valley, seeking the company of unwary travelers. Many believed he was the spirit of a lost soul who perished in the unforgiving desert, eternally searching for a way out. I'm Hank Davis, a seasoned long-haul trucker who spent countless nights navigating the lonely stretches of American highways. My job took me through Death Valley frequently, transporting goods from one end of the state to the other. Despite the eerie stories, I've always maintained a pragmatic view, attributing such tales to the mind's propensity for fear and the isolation of the desert. However, one fateful night would challenge everything I thought I knew about Death Valley and its haunted reputation. It was a sweltering summer night in 1985, and I was driving my trusty 1982 Peterbilt truck along the desolate highways of Death Valley. The temperature outside was soaring, the air thick with humidity, making the night feel oppressively close. My truck's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the endless expanse of sand and rock that stretched out before me. The rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the radio were my only companions in this vast, empty landscape. As I approached a particularly isolated stretch of road, a sudden storm rolled in, bringing with it heavy rain and howling winds. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, and the roads became slick with rainwater. I slowed down, carefully navigating the treacherous conditions, my mind focused on the safe delivery of my cargo. It was then that I saw him, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. The man was drenched from the downpour, his clothes soaked through and clinging to his body. He stood motionless, his posture hunched as if battling the elements for days. Despite the raging storm, he didn't seek shelter under a tree or vehicle. Instead, he seemed to be waiting, his eyes fixed on the approaching truck. Against my better judgment, I decided to stop. Compassion outweighed caution, and I knew that Death Valley's isolation made it easy for someone to become lost or stranded. I pulled over to the side of the road, the truck's brakes squealing against the wet asphalt. The man approached slowly, each step deliberate and weary. As he climbed into the back seat, I couldn't help but notice the exhaustion etched into his features and the haunting emptiness in his eyes. He sat down without a word, his silence adding to the unnerving atmosphere inside the truck. From the moment he entered the truck, an unsettling feeling began to settle over me. The air inside the cabin grew inexplicably cold, despite the heater working overtime to combat the chill. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, trying to make sense of his vacant stare. His eyes were hollow, devoid of any spark of life, and they seemed to pierce right through me, filling the space with a sense of sorrow and desperation. "Where are you headed?" I asked, attempting to break the silence and ease the tension. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the windshield, something invisible to my eyes. "I just want to get home," he finally whispered, his voice low and strained, carrying a weight that seemed almost otherworldly. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Home is a long way from here," I replied cautiously. "Where exactly?" He shook his head slightly, not providing any further details. The rain continued to lash against the truck, and the wind howled outside, as if nature itself was conspiring to keep us trapped in this moment. My unease deepened as I noticed something odd about his attire. His clothes, though practical for a long-haul journey, seemed outdated, reminiscent of styles from decades before. It was as if he had been plucked from another time, a relic of a past era that didn't belong in the present. As we drove deeper into the heart of Death Valley, I began to sense that something was terribly wrong. The silence in the truck was oppressive, broken only by the sound of his heavy breathing and the relentless storm outside. My attempts to engage him in conversation were met with only brief, cryptic responses, leaving me feeling more isolated and vulnerable with each passing mile. Then, without warning, I felt a sharp, icy gust brush past me, making me jump in my seat. The temperature inside the truck had plummeted further, and I could see my breath condensing in the frigid air. I glanced back at him through the mirror, but his expression remained unchanged, empty, desolate, and filled with an unspoken anguish. His hand twitched slightly, as if reaching out for something beyond my comprehension. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the landscape blurring into a nightmarish panorama of sand and shadow. The oppressive silence was now punctuated by the occasional sound of debris being swept across the highway by the storm, creating an eerie symphony that echoed through the vast emptiness of Death Valley. After what felt like hours of driving through the unending night, we reached a particularly desolate stretch of road, a long, Straight path surrounded by towering sand dunes that cast ominous shadows under the dim light of my headlights. The storm showed no signs of abating, and I decided it was time to check my map and ensure I was still on the right path. I parked the truck at a small rest stop, a solitary structure that offered no shelter or comfort in the midst of the storm. Climbing out to retrieve the map, I took a moment to collect my thoughts, trying to shake off the lingering fears that had settled in my chest. As I bent down to examine the map, I heard a sudden, violent thud from the back of the truck. Heart-pounding, I rushed back inside, only to find the back seat completely empty. My mind raced as I scanned the cabin, but there was no sign of the man. The doors were all locked, and the windows showed no evidence of forced entry. Confusion and fear gnawed at me. Had he somehow vanished, or was I imagining things? Turning around, I noticed a small puddle of water on the floor near the back seat. It looked like tears, or perhaps remnants of his damp clothes. But how had it gotten there? I had not moved since he had entered the truck, and the storm outside was relentless, with no signs of calm. I reached out to touch the puddle, feeling the coolness of the water against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the heat outside. I scanned the rearview mirror once more, my eyes searching for any sign of movement, any indication that he might return. But the seat remained empty. The only thing left behind was the lingering chill and the unexplained puddle of water. My mind struggled to rationalize the impossible. How could he have disappeared without a trace? Desperate to escape the nightmare that had unfolded, I jumped back into the truck and revved the engine, hoping to drive away from the rest stop and the haunting presence that had plagued me. As I accelerated, the storm began to abate, the rain easing to a light drizzle. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of urgency to put as much distance between myself and Death Valley as possible. But even as I drove away, the memory of his hollow eyes and the inexplicable signs of his presence lingered, etching themselves into my mind like a haunting melody that refused to fade. Determined to understand what had happened, I sought out the local authorities to report the strange encounter. The police were sympathetic but skeptical, offering no concrete explanations for the bizarre events I had experienced. Frustrated and seeking answers, I turned to the local community, hoping to uncover more about the mysterious figure who had appeared on Death Valley's highways. During my conversations with residents and fellow truckers, I learned about the numerous unsolved cases that had plagued Death Valley over the years. Many drivers had reported encounters with the last companion, a ghostly hitchhiker who seemed doomed to roam the desert roads forever. According to the legends, he was the spirit of a man who had lost his way in the unforgiving desert, succumbing to the extreme conditions and perishing in the sands. Unable to find peace, his soul was said to wander the highways, seeking the company of travelers to help him find his final resting place. One particularly chilling story was that of Tom Willis, a trucker who had encountered the same ghost years before my own experience. He described a similar encounter, offering his truck to a stranded man who never showed signs of life, only to have him vanish mysteriously, leaving behind strange symbols and a lingering sense of dread. Tom had never fully recovered from the incident, haunted by the ghostly presence that seemed to follow him on every subsequent journey through Death Valley. As I delved deeper into the history of these supernatural occurrences, I discovered that the last companion was not merely a restless spirit but perhaps a vessel for something far more malevolent. Some theories suggested that his presence was tied to ancient rituals or dark forces that thrived in the desolate expanses of Death Valley, drawing in unsuspecting travelers to fulfill a sinister purpose. The aftermath of my encounter with the ghostly hitchhiker left me deeply unsettled. The nightmares began almost immediately, vivid and terrifying visions of being trapped in the endless desert, pursued by the hollow-eyed man who had vanished from my truck. In my dreams, I found myself driving through an unending landscape of sand and rock, the sun beating down mercilessly as the ghostly figure stood by the roadside, never aging, never fading, always seeking. But the nightmares were just the beginning. Back in reality, I started noticing subtle but disturbing changes. When I returned to my truck after my deliveries, I found faint, almost imperceptible scratches on the door handles and the dashboard, marks that resembled ancient symbols and sigils. They seemed to glow faintly in the dark, a reminder of the encounter that had left its mark on me. One evening, while preparing for another night shift, I glanced into the rearview mirror and saw a shadowy figure standing just beyond the truck's windows, watching me intently. My blood ran cold as I realized that the ghostly presence was still lingering, refusing to let me forget or move on. Each time I drove through Death Valley, I felt an invisible force pressing against the back of my truck, as if the last companion was always one step behind, waiting for another chance to pull me into his endless journey. Desperate for answers and seeking a way to break free from the haunting cycle, I reached out to paranormal experts and local historians who had studied Death Valley's dark history. Through extensive research and consultations, I learned about ancient burial grounds and forgotten rituals that might hold the key to appeasing the restless spirit. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that my encounter was part of a larger, more complex tapestry of supernatural occurrences that had been woven into the very fabric of Death Valley. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I decided to confront the last companion head-on. Armed with the knowledge I had gathered and a deep sense of responsibility, I returned to the exact spot where I had first encountered him. The night was eerily calm, the storm having passed, leaving the desert bathed in the soft light of a full moon. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant howling of the wind through the sand. I parked my truck in the same isolated stretch of road, the place now bearing the scars of my previous encounter, faint scratches on the doors and dashboard serving as grim reminders of what had transpired. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the truck, feeling the oppressive heat of the desert night pressing down on me. The vast expanse of Death Valley stretched out before me, a lonely and unforgiving landscape that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. As I stood there, the air grew thick with a palpable tension, and the familiar chill descended upon me. From the shadows emerged the ghostly figure of the man I had picked up, his eyes empty yet filled with an unspoken sorrow. "You came back," he whispered, his voice a haunting echo in the stillness of the night. "I did," I replied firmly, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my insides. "I want to help you find peace." He reached out a spectral hand, and I felt a surge of energy ripple through me, as if the very essence of Death Valley was drawing me into a deeper understanding of his plight. "You cannot help me," he murmured, his form wavering like a mirage in the desert heat. "I am bound here by my own despair." Determined not to let him suffer any longer, I drew upon the ancient rituals and symbols I had discovered during my research. Using the markings I had seen on my truck, I began to chant the incantations designed to release restless spirits from their earthly bonds. The air around us seemed to shimmer with energy, the symbols glowing brightly as the ritual took hold. As I continued to chant, the ghostly figure of the man began to dissolve, his form becoming more ethereal and less defined. "Thank you," he whispered, a hint of relief and gratitude in his voice. "May you find peace as well." With a final, fading smile, his spirit was released, leaving behind a profound sense of calm that washed over me. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the desert night felt less menacing, replaced by a serene stillness that signified the end of the curse that had plagued Death Valley for so long. I stood there for a moment longer, absorbing the peace that now enveloped the area, knowing that I had played a role in helping a lost soul find his way to the afterlife. As I returned to my truck and began my journey back to civilization, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment and relief, the haunting memories of Death Valley now tempered by the knowledge that I had made a difference. Months have passed since that night in Death Valley, and the nightmares have gradually faded, replaced by a sense of closure and purpose. I continue my work as a trucker, but my perspective has forever changed. The legends of Death Valley no longer seem like mere folklore, but remnants of a tragic history that demands respect and understanding. The stories of the last companion and other restless spirits linger in my mind, serving as a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. I often find myself sharing my experience with fellow drivers, hoping to caution them about the dangers of Death Valley's supernatural allure and the importance of compassion towards those who might be lost or seeking help. One evening, as I drove through a familiar stretch of road, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but the empty expanse of the desert. The memory of that encounter had faded, but the lessons learned remained etched in my soul. Death Valley, with all its harsh beauty and dark secrets, continues to stand as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of unresolved souls seeking peace. Sometimes, when the desert winds howl through the night and the stars glimmer faintly above, I catch a fleeting glimpse of a shadow on the roadside, a silent reminder that some journeys never truly end, and some companions never really leave. But I drive on, knowing that I've helped one soul find his way, and perhaps, in doing so, I've found a measure of peace for myself as well.